friends, it's Loree with the blog wagonwheelhomestead.com. I'm here today to show you how to make a super easy sourdough sandwich bread. You're gonna love this recipe. Once you try it, you're never gonna look for another sourdough sandwich recipe ever again. I can promise you that. It's been my favorite for quite a while now. And this is what the bread looks like. It is so soft and squishy, and it stays this way for several days because the sourdough just makes it so soft. It's just developed the gluten so well. It's just absolutely beautiful. So why bother making sourdough sandwich bread anyway? By the way, I have a yeast sandwich bread recipe that we do like a lot in our family, and we make it quite often. It's called Amish white bread, and I'll try to link it here. But there's not going to be anything as soft or as good for you as sourdough, because the sourdough is going to break down all the phytic acid in the flour that's in the recipe, and it's going to give you better gut health. And if you happen to be gluten intolerant, it quite possibly will make it easier for you to be able to eat something with gluten in it. Okay, so that's a lot of the reason why people make sourdough. Also, if you can't get yeast, which we've all experienced that in recent years in times we won't name, so it's really important to know how to make bread without yeast, okay? Not only is it more healthy, but it's just more sustainable as well. This is a really flexible recipe. If you want a sweeter loaf of bread, then increase the sugar. If you don't want to make this with butter, then make it with eggs or with beef tallow, okay? It's going to give you the framework you need to make bread no matter what you have in your kitchen, no matter what time of year it is, and we're going to talk about timing, okay? And all of the different things. It takes me about 24 hours from start to finish. Now that's including feeding my starter to make this bread, okay? But the hands-on time is like less than 10 minutes, okay? So it doesn't take very long to make 4 loaves of bread with this sourdough sandwich bread recipe. And I do use my mixer for this. You wouldn't have to, but the Bosch mixer saves a lot of mixing, a lot of kneading, okay? So I highly recommend getting a Bosch mixer, and I'll link that in the description box below. They are so worth the money, and you will not regret getting one. So with that, I am gonna jump into the footage of making this and show you start to finish, exactly step by step, what to do. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. I would love to help you any way that I can. Please be sure to visit the blog wagonwheelhomestead.com for the full printable recipe to this sourdough sandwich bread. And if you like learning more about ways you can be more sustainable, ways that you can grow, cook, and preserve your own food to reduce your dependence on the grocery store, then please like and subscribe to this channel, because that is the stuff that we are talking about here. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm going to feed my starter in preparation for making this easy sourdough sandwich bread. So this is just as easy as the Amish white bread that I have a recipe for with the yeast, except that you just have to think farther ahead to feed your starter, and then it takes a little longer to rise. Okay, that's basically the biggest differences in the recipes. So sometimes I do Amish white bread just because it's faster, but the sourdough is amazing. There's so many good reasons to do a sourdough sandwich bread. Okay, so this ran over because it was happy. And so it just has a little bit left in the bottom. I could just feed it in this jar, but I'm just gonna put it in a new jar because it's probably better. Doesn't really matter. Okay, I'm just gonna put this one in to soak so that it can be washed. Okay, so I just put a little bit of starter in the bottom of my jar. It doesn't really matter how much, because however much flour and water you add to that starter, it's gonna eventually take it over and turn it all into starter. So you could do this even in a great big bowl or even in a big bucket, okay? If you added lots and lots of flour and water to a super small amount of starter, it would just take it longer to take it all over, okay? But it doesn't really matter, so I'm not gonna measure the ratios, okay? So again, this was super thick starter. Now it's discard, right? Because it's fallen back down. And I'm just gonna pour that in here, and then I'm gonna add some flour. So this is just all-purpose flour, and probably about there, and it's probably still gonna run over because that's just I boil over every pot of everything on the stove. Like, that's just how I roll. Like, I never think it's quite right until it's full and overflowing. So as a result, I end up cleaning up lots of messes. Anyway, sorry that you'll have to watch that on here, but that's just how I cook. And so I guess that's how it is. So now I'm just adding water until it's really thick. So obviously it's super thick right now. Like, it's dry and floury, so it needs a little bit more. And I'm making sure that I scrape the starter on the bottom kind of up into the new flour and water that I'm adding to it. Okay? So again, for bread baking, I suggest using a thick, strong starter, or leaven, if you will, because it's what's going to leaven or rise your bread, and you want it super strong. Okay, there's some recipes that you can have, feed it equal parts flour and water if you want, for other things, right? But I just always feed my starter this way, and it works really well for everything. I'm just giving it a good stir, making sure all the lumps are gone. Okay, and it's about half full or so. It'll probably run over, but anyway, I'll set it on a plate. I'll just put a little plate or something over the top of it and set it over in the corner, and it's gonna bubble over. And then tonight, before I go to bed, we're gonna mix up the next portion, or the first part of the dough, for our sourdough sandwich bread, okay? So you just wanna start with a strong starter. I could have started this morning, but it's summertime right now, so this is probably gonna be super bubbly, in 4 or 5 hours before I'm ready to go to bed. So that's the first step. All right, it's been a few hours. It's just getting close to bedtime for me. Here's the starter. I told you it was gonna run over. Sure enough, it did. All right, so all we're gonna do before bedtime, this is really simple. It's gonna take 2 minutes, okay? We're gonna take 2 cups of water. It doesn't necessarily have to be warm water because it's gonna sit here all night, but it can be. And in here, I'm gonna put 2 cups of this super active, happy sourdough starter. Okay, and then, by the way, there's not a lot left in there. See, I dumped it all out. That is enough though for you to refeed this if you wanted to in this jar. I'm not going to because it's a mess, okay? But you sure can. That's enough. Just whatever's left in the jar is enough for you to, feed it some more flour and water, okay? Keep it going. So it doesn't have to be a lot. Sourdough is amazing stuff. All right, so here we go. We have 2 cups of water, 2 cups of starter, and I just made some other bread in here earlier, so I did not wash it yet because I was just gonna be making bread again here in a minute. Just a minute, I gotta get a spatula. Or a spoon, whatever works. Okay, and into this we're gonna add 3 cups of flour. Now you can use bread flour, all-purpose flour, it doesn't matter. I have all-purpose flour sitting here, so I'm gonna probably use just all-purpose flour for this part. And then tomorrow when I actually mix up the bread, the rest of the way, then I will put in bread flour. But it doesn't really matter. I've made this with many different versions of flour. Obviously, all-purpose or bread flour is gonna be the best for sandwich bread. You're really not gonna wanna use a whole wheat. You can, but it's gonna be more dense. And so you're probably gonna be happiest just with the regular flour. So I'll add that. Okay, 1, 2, 3. By the way, this recipe makes 4 loaves. So if you don't want to make that many, you can, cut it in half, right? But this recipe makes 4 loaves. That just works best for my family. So I'm going to just turn this on. That's it. Just mix it until it's combined. So basically what you're doing is you're making the leaven. Okay, you're making the starter, if you will, for tomorrow's bread. But you're making it using active starter, and this is what's gonna make it super soft, and it's gonna stay really nice for several days, okay? So that's all for tonight. We're gonna just put this lid on. Again, this is my Bosch mixer. I've talked about it in my other videos. I use this every day, sometimes several times a day. So I will link this down below. Man, these things pay themselves off in a short amount of time, and they last for years and years and years. You basically can't break them. So anyway, I'm gonna leave the lid on like that. In the morning, we're gonna add the rest of the ingredients and continue on with our bread. All right, it's the next morning. Show you this. Nice and bubbly, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add 1/2 cup of sugar, 4 teaspoons of salt. You can measure exactly if you want, but I never do. And 1/4 cup of melted butter. Now, if you don't have butter, you can use any other kind of fat, okay? Like coconut oil, melted beef tallow, even regular oil. You can also use a couple of eggs, okay, in here if you don't have any of that kind of fat, all right? It just doesn't really matter. And then I'm gonna put 3 cups of milk. Now, if it was winter time, I would make sure this milk is warm. But because I'm gonna be busy outside and I don't want this bread to raise too fast and over ferment, I'm using cold milk because it's gonna slow down the fermentation process just a little bit and give me a little more time to do some of the other things that I need to do today, okay? You can also put buttermilk in here, or like a combination of buttermilk, cultured dairy, and milk, okay? So any combination of that to equal 3 cups, okay? All right, I'm gonna turn this on, and I'm gonna add 9 to 11 cups of bread flour. Now, how do I know exactly how much to add? I'm gonna stop adding when the dough, comes away from the side of the bowl, okay? When it's not sticking to the edge of the bowl anymore. And I'm gonna add actually about 1/2 of the flour first, let it mix a little bit, then add the rest of the flour. And you're gonna see at the end exactly how it should look. Now, why is it not just an exact measurement of flour? It's because if your sourdough is runnier than mine, your starter, then you're gonna need to add a little bit more flour. If you put in eggs versus butter, then it's gonna need a little bit more flour or a little bit less, just depending, okay? So that's why it's 9 to 11 cups. And sometimes it just, it depends on how you measure your flour, right? Or the weight of your flour per bag, right? Sometimes flours vary. So it's all good. You're gonna see exactly what to do. I have had this dough mixed up really sticky and really dry, and it's come out fine both times. So it's not a big deal. And if you make this a few times, you're gonna learn exactly how you want it for texture, okay? So we're gonna add about 1/2 of the flour, and then we'll add the rest of the flour towards the end, and I'll show you what it looks like. Then we're just gonna put this in a different bowl, like an oiled bowl so it doesn't stick, and cover it with a towel, and we're just gonna leave it for 2 or 3 hours until it doubles in size. Okay, and it might take longer than that in the winter. It might take less than this in the summer. Just depends, just until it's doubled in size. And then we're gonna shape it and put it in bread pans, let it rise again, and bake it. Really super simple. All right, so I put 9.5 cups of flour in, let it mix for quite a while, and the edges of the bowl are clean. Hopefully you can see that. The lighting is funny because of my window. Okay, but do you see how it's still pretty sticky, like it's coating my fingers? So I'm gonna put just a little bit more in, okay? It's better. It's still a little shaggy, so I'm gonna let it mix just a little bit more. You don't want it too dry either. Like there's kind of a fine line and you'll find that line. All right, let's try this. Okay, this is better. So it's not sticking to my fingers as bad. I can pull it up and see through it. It could use just a little bit more. I mean, this is fine. I have made it this way before, but I'm gonna go ahead. So this is 10 1/4. Let's go with like 10 3/4, okay, for this batch, and let's see. And you don't have to use a mixer. You can do this by hand, but it's gonna take you some kneading, okay? So, I mean, you know. Okay, this is much better. This is much better. It's not as sticky, okay? And the gluten is gonna develop even more fully when it sits, okay? It's a little sticky, but not bad. Like, I feel like I could knead this with just a little bit of flour and it would be fine. And just like artisan sourdough bread, which by the way, I'll try to put a link to that here. Artisan sourdough bread is really sticky when you start and it loses its sticky to some degree as you go, okay? So there's a fine line between not too dry and not too wet, and you're gonna find it when you get used to doing this and you're gonna be just fine. Okay, I'm just gonna take this out of here, stick it into a bowl and cover it with a towel, and we're gonna come back in 2 or 3 hours and shape this into bread dough, into the loaf pans. Okay, so this has been sitting for 3 hours. It was about 2 inches below the top of the bowl. As you can see, it's raising up out of the bowl nicely. And you know, sometimes it may only need to set for an hour or two, but again, we used cold milk today because I was busy outside. It's summertime. And we raise a big market garden, so I was busy out there doing all of those things. So anyway, it's been 3 hours. My house is currently 75 degrees. So again, you raise it as long as it takes for it to raise, okay? In the winter, it's gonna be different than it is in the summer, and you'll figure that out, okay? So we're just gonna punch this down and turn it out onto the counter. It's such beautiful dough. And we shouldn't have to use any extra flour. We will if we have to, but we shouldn't need to. All right. Okay, I'm gonna divide this into 4 loaves. Now, if you wanna be super precise, you can put these pieces on a scale until they are the same weight, okay? But this is just for my family, and so I'm not gonna take the time to do that, but you sure can. Sometimes what I do is I just feel them. Yeah, they feel about the same. This one might be just a little bit lighter. This one looks a little bigger. Anyway, it's just the most beautiful dough. You will really enjoy working with it. So what I'm gonna do is just spread it out. Okay, move him over here. Just spread it out, and I'm just gonna fold it into a triangle like this. Then I'm gonna roll it up. This is just to put tension on the dough. Similar a little bit to what you might do with some artisan dough, right? Or a boulet. Okay, and then I have 4 bread pans, and I'm just gonna grease them with a little bit of butter. Because again, I have a lot of butter sitting around because we milk 2 Jersey cows every day. We make all of our own cheese and dairy products. So butter is something I typically have on hand. If you don't have butter, you could spray these pans, but you want to oil them in some way. Okay, I'm gonna wash my hands. I don't like that grease on my hands. And I'm just gonna put these into the pans just like that. Okay. We'll do the same thing with this one. Whichever side is smoothest is the side I put down, because that's what's going to be on the top of your loaf, okay? I'm just going to roll it up and give it some tension. The more tension, the better. That's what helps it to rise. Okay. Let's see, this side's the smoothest, so okay. Stick it right in there. Push it down in the corners a little bit if you want to. I'm not super particular about how I make my loaves. It always seems to turn out just fine. If you get a crease on the top, just keep folding it under until you have it nice and smooth. And so again, you know, it took me less than 5 minutes yesterday to mix this up, right? Including feeding my starter. And it took me a few minutes this morning to mix my dough, but I was doing things in the kitchen the whole time, right? Because it was mixing on its own. This took like 2 or 3 minutes to shape the bread. When we come back, it'll probably take 2 or 3 hours for this to raise. We're gonna be gone to swimming lessons, so I'm just gonna leave it here on the counter. When I come back, we're gonna slash the top of the loaves and give it more room for expansion and stick it right in the oven. So really, you know, 10 or 15 minutes at the most is all you're gonna spend on making these 4 loaves of sourdough sandwich bread that are fully long fermented. So something else that I failed to mention is, when you first mix up your dough in the mixer, like when you add your 9 to 11 cups of flour at that step, you could actually do that in the evening. So you could back up the whole process, do that in the evening, and then you could put it in the fridge, the dough in the fridge overnight, shape it in the morning to rise for a couple, 2 or 3 hours on the counter, and then bake it. So, you know, there's options, right? And of course, putting it in the fridge would be better, you know, in the summertime, right? I wouldn't probably do that in the winter. But in the winter, usually there's more time in the house at home. So we're gonna just cover these with a towel and we'll be back in a couple hours. All right, we're back from swimming lessons. It's been about 3 hours and I probably could have left the bread a little less than 3 hours because it's so warm today. It's like 95 degrees outside, 75 inside, but it's gonna be just fine. Okay, so somewhere you want it to, you know, puff up out of the pan. And this might be a little more than what you normally would want, but it's all good, okay? So this is my little bread lane, my little score, and I'm just gonna put some score marks in the bread, which is gonna allow it to expand more when I put it in the oven. By the way, I did preheat my oven to 375. Okay, and we're gonna bake it for 30 to 40 minutes or until the internal temperature is around 190 degrees. I find my oven, it's about 30 minutes, but we'll just see how it goes. So I'm gonna pop these into the oven. Okay, it's been 30 minutes. This is just a meat thermometer. I'm gonna stick in these loaves. Now, I don't always do this, but I'm showing you this because, you know, you kind of want to learn your oven. Every oven is different. You'll figure out what amount of time you should leave your bread in for. So I'm just gonna stick this in. Let me fog up my camera. Just gonna stick it in just like that. Shut it, so I'm not letting my heat out, and then in just a minute I will check it. Okay. Yep, and it's 195. Okay, so I'm gonna take these out. So 30 minutes was enough at 375 degrees for my oven. All right, and here it is. So I'm just gonna dump it out. hot, obviously. And set it on these little cooling racks. And I like to brush mine with butter right away. There we go. It just gives it a nice soft exterior crust. So I just keep this butter brush in some butter on my counter because I bake almost every day. So just slather it up good with butter. You can also, you know, just use a stick of butter, right? But my butter, since it comes right from the cow, I don't usually have it formed into sticks. So this is just what works for me. All right, there it is. So I'm gonna let this cool for, you know, a couple hours probably. It's about 4 o'clock, so it's taken me exactly 24 hours to make this bread at this point. You know, your timing will depend on the time of year and your temperature and all of that, but it is just absolutely beautiful and it tastes so good and it lasts so long on the counter because it's got all the beneficial bacteria in it from the sourdough, so it's not going to be prone to mold or anything. I've had it last over a week. So anyway, I'll come back in a while and we will slice it and I'll show you what it's like. All right, let's cut into one of these. It's been a couple of hours. They're mostly cool. I'm just gonna cut it here on this rack. And they are so soft. So I have never made sandwich bread of any kind, yeast or otherwise, that is as soft as sourdough. There is something about the process of making it with sourdough that's way softer than any yeast bread that you will ever make. So it is just absolutely beautiful. Let me show you. See how soft it is? I mean, it's like pillowy soft. And it stays soft for several days. So these make the best sandwiches ever. It doesn't crumble, it doesn't fall apart. So good. So let's put a little bit of butter on here. And this is jalapeno jelly made with the jalapenos and peppers from our garden. And look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So awesome. So I really hope you try this sourdough sandwich recipe. I guarantee you if you try it, you're never gonna look for another sourdough sandwich recipe. Sometimes it is nice to make a really fast yeast sandwich bread like the Amish white bread that I make just because of time, but you're not gonna get softer or better flavor than making this sourdough sandwich bread. So anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you like and subscribe to our channel and learn more ways to grow a simple, sustainable life on a modern day homestead. We'll talk to you in the next video.